What did she say? It was a Saturday afternoon, and we had company. Jenny and her husband, Trev, had been our friends since we moved to Houston. We went out to dinner with them, to neighborhood parties, and to each other's houses after a movie or outing. They were the same age as us, mid-30s, all of us college graduates dealing with college debt, careers, and occasional separations due to Trev and my wife, Debbie's business travels. Deb was getting ready for one of them, and Trav had just left our house for the airport to head to the West Coast, which was his territory. It was our way of life. They traveled and we kept the home fires burning. Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our traveling was minimal, if not infrequent. Most of the time, only one of the two couples had a traveling spouse. When that happened, the other spouse would visit the couple in town for dinner or a weekend picnic. After Trev said goodbye and took a cab to the airport, I let the girls chat in the kitchen and went to the garage. I cleaned my workbench and then checked out security system we'd spent good money on after the recent robberies in our subdivision. We had microphones and cameras in every room that fed the server in the attic. Connecting to our cloud account saved everything that was captured when each device was activated by motion sensors. I could check any room with a phone app or any computer I could log on to. Out of habit, I checked to see if it was working. "How was your last trip?" Jenny asked my wife, Debbie, as they sat at the kitchen table. "The usual," Debbie giggled. "Work, dinner, the bar, and then eventually a little sleep. Is it true what they say about people who wiggle away from their families on business trips?" Jenny was clearly worried about her husband. My wife was quiet for a moment before answering a meaningful second pause. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," my wife replied, taking a sip of her drink. "Trev always comes back to your house, doesn't he?" "Yes. But I wonder what he does when he's alone." "If he's alone, Jen," her wife reassured her, "he comes home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's away." "What do you mean, Deb?" "Exactly what I said," my wife replied. "What happens outside the house means nothing?" I was shocked as my wife's words bounced up and down in my head. What happens outside the house means nothing? What happens when people aren't home? That doesn't mean anything. What happens when people are away from home means nothing? Did she really say that? I asked myself. "Debbie, what are you saying?" Jenny asked anxiously, but by now, Debbie had become quieter and more composed. "Nothing, Jen," she replied cautiously, "only that you're worrying for nothing. Trev loves you to death. He comes home to you and loves you. His trips are just business. Nothing more." I could see that Jenny wasn't reassured by Debbie's remark, but she politely allowed my wife to change the subject. I let them chat for a while before I went back into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. After what I had heard, I wanted my mind to be clear. After another 40 minutes of small talk, Jenny drove home and we settled in for the night. I was polite to my wife, but cautious. To say her words made me nervous would be an understatement. As she went upstairs to take a shower, various thoughts crossed my mind. Had she cheated while she was away? Had she really done it many times? Had she only done it once recently? Weeks or months ago? But the way she said it spoke volumes. Her comment wasn't a thoughtful introspection. In fact, there was no consternation or disapproval in her tone. Just a statement of fact, and acceptance of it is what it is without any disapproval. What am I supposed to do? What does any man do? Can I say just a few words to her? Would I throw 4 years of marriage away? We were thinking of having children. Did she have sex when she traveled? How could I be sure the child would be mine? Then I thought, she usually traveled to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have lovers in each location, or did she only have one lover? Was he prettier, fatter, longer? None of these thoughts made me horny. Instead, I felt only disappointment, anxiety, and sadness. The woman I loved was cheating on me. As much as I wanted to be wrong, the logical part of my mind argued otherwise. My wife, Debbie, had spoken up and exposed her infidelity. I didn't sleep with her that night. She came down to get me, but I acted like I was sleeping on the couch with my face buried in the pillows. She tried to wake me up, but I was in a deep sleep. And eventually she gave up, not caring to turn around to face her. I stayed in that position until I fell into a restless sleep until morning. The first thing I smelled when I started to wake up was the smell of coffee, and the sound of footsteps and sandals in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee on the table. Anxious, I said nothing and didn't move from my seat, but I realized I was only delaying the inevitable. When I opened my eyes, Debbie was standing beside the couch wearing only sandals and a robe. Her blonde hair fell over her right shoulder as she looked at me thoughtfully. I glanced over and stood up, ignoring the coffee. She threw a worried look at me as I silently walked past. Locking the bathroom door, I started brushing my teeth. Creaking noises from behind the door told me she was standing outside, but then they fell silent. We hadn't said a word to each other all morning. I was glad because I wasn't ready to talk to her. I wasn't afraid to face her. If anything, I was looking forward to it, but I had to know for sure first. I needed information. That was my nature. I never took a single step without knowing the score. Grabbing my laptop, I settled into the study in the corner of our living room. It was a desk that faced the living room from the corner, and I could work so she couldn't see the screen. Debbie passed by from the bedroom to the kitchen a few times, but kept her distance from me. The silence made me angry. Why didn't she ask me what was wrong? Was this part of her game? Calming down, I focused on finding private investigators in the city she traveled to. After filling out forms and writing descriptions of what I needed to do, I used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to investigate. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 in the afternoon. I didn't want to eat with her. "No," I replied and pretended to be busy. She kitchened trying to figure out what was wrong with me, but I didn't feel like looking back. Any wife who had nothing to hide would have wondered why her husband had turned his back on her. Any wife who had nothing to worry about. "Maybe we should go out," I said suddenly and stood up, reaching for my wallet, cell phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a few seconds, then nodded and reached for her purse. She already had her cell phone in her hand. The same phone she held all the time. Debbie never let the phone out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed for the door, I let her pass and stared at the beautiful and young figure. A figure that until last night, I thought of as my body. We always took my car when we went out together, so she moved to the passenger seat waiting for me to open the door like I always did. Given recent events, it was the last thing I wanted to do, but I forced myself to. Whatever happened before she left on Tuesday, I had to make sure she didn't suspect anything. I thought I might have already messed it up. "I'm sorry about today," I said. "I think I made a mistake on the project work and need to do some quick talking and corrections when I come in on Monday." "Oh," she exclaimed with relief. Then caught herself and made a concerned look. "Johnson's project," she asked. "About the house I finished 3 weeks ago." So much for her attention during our conversations. "No," I replied. "Something to do with a future project. I'll do new drawings this week and correct my mistake. Everything should be fine. I just hate making mistakes." "You're being too hard on yourself," she replied more calmly when I gave her the expected explanation. "Everyone makes mistakes." I almost said, "That's for sure," but held back. We chatted about trivia and then about bills. Mentally, I was thinking about how to cope with where to go to bed. There was no way I was going to get away with falling asleep on the couch again. When we got home, I showered and went to bed with my tablet to read, but I think I stared at the same page for a full 30 minutes while Debbie showered and came out of the bathroom. She put her robe back on. This she did when she was naked under it and meant sex. We had sex. I thought back to the last time we made love, the last time she was in love with me. She was lying next to me in her robe, but I kept reading or pretending to read. Putting her hand on my thigh, she moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" she finally said. I didn't answer, but turned to study her face. I wanted to see if she would give me a sign. I found your pills in the bathroom. You're taking them again. She froze at my statement. Yes, I know. She replied. I'm really sorry about that. I thought we'd wait a few months. I nodded, not wanting to make a fuss. No problem. I replied. You're out of your mind, but it wasn't concerned. It was more of a statement or annoyance. No, I replied. I don't want a baby right now either. With you. I didn't say, but I thought she was silent for a few seconds, then removed her hand as I lay still. After a few minutes, she turned away from me and turned off the light on her side. I could hear her breathing and finally cried softly. It was all I could bear. I stood up taking the clipboard with me and walked out of the room. Carson? I heard her words, but I closed the door and went back to the couch. The next morning, when I got up, she was already awake and dressed. It was 6 in the morning in time for my morning run. She was already dressed for work. I made you coffee, she said, and was about to say something, but stopped. I guess she had already realized I was mad at her. When did you find out about the pills? She asked. I wanted to say just yesterday, but I didn't want her to think it was recent. Last week, I lied. No longer caring that I was lying to her. And you didn't tell me, you didn't bother to ask me what I thought about it. I said. That's all. No problem, Deb. I replied. If you don't want a baby with me, then I don't want one. She wanted to say something, but I walked right past her. I'm late. I had to run. I needed solitude to clear my head. Running had always helped me focus and pull myself together. It started in junior high when I was in middle school and then high school, the army, and then college. Running always cured my absent-mindedness and insecurity as a young man, and then as a man, now a married man considering divorce. In the evening, she came home and cooked dinner. Out of politeness, I sat down next to her and ate. I barely finished my plate, but I tried to be polite. Can we talk about the baby when I get home from my trip? She asked. If you want, I answered, but all I could think about was what she'd said to Jenny. What happens outside the house means nothing. The next morning, she was waiting for me to wake up. She was dressed for traveling. Her travel bag was by the door along with her coat. Are you going to be okay while I'm gone? She asked. I'll survive. I replied. I always do. Carson, she said. I love you. I nodded politely. She saw the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard a sob as she ran out the door, leaving me to stare at her as I heard the car start and drive away. Training. That day, I went to see a lawyer about the divorce. Since we had no children, all we had to do was divide all the property accumulated since the first day of our marriage, but adultery factored into the division of property. We didn't have a prenup, which I now realize was stupid, but if the investigators found something useful, I could end up getting most of it, but the lawyers will fight over it in court and drag the case out to get more fees. What a mess. Jenny has been texting me and leaving me messages, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. Maybe I'll stop by to see her later. But she beat me to it and showed up at my work. She was waiting by my car. Why aren't you answering my calls and texts? She asked. I had something on my mind. I answered. Take me to dinner and then home. She said, we need to talk. What happens when people aren't home means nothing? When I reminded her of that remark from my wife, Jenny nodded and looked directly at me. Where is she today? She asked. In San Diego, I answered. At least that's what she said. Did you call her at work? She asked. No. I answered, feeling stupid. Maybe you should have, she replied, because I did. For a while I stared at her. Permission. The following Friday, Debbie returned from her trip. She drove to work first and then drove home. By then, I had already made dinner and set the table. Oh my goodness, honey! She exclaimed, you went all out. She ran up to kiss me. It wasn't a tongue kiss, but it was the type of kiss a husband and wife usually give each other even in public. I let her kiss me and it was a quick kiss. There was no awkward moment to worry about. In that moment, I thought that this kiss and her warm hand touching my arm would be our last. Trav and Jen are on their way here for dinner, I said, checking the stuffed peppers in the oven. Trav and Jen, she asked in surprise. Are they coming tonight? I understood her predicament. I thought you and I. She stopped talking as I turned and gave her a polite, disarming smile. I think I'll change and get ready. I watched her go into the bedroom to remove her business suit. She had gone to her last meeting in Omaha that morning, then flew home and walked by her office before returning. Understandably, she planned to shower, eat dinner, and get some rest. After all, she'd had a pretty long and stressful week, hadn't she? I checked my phone one last time for messages from Jen. On the road, the email had been sent 5 minutes ago. At that moment, the upstairs shower turned off. If everything went right, Deb would be dressed soon, just in time for our guests. They're on their way. I called out to her, but there was no response. I could imagine why. Seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs in jeans and a white tank top. The straps of her pink bra were visible underneath. She wore flip-flops like we both did when we vacationed at home. Smiling nervously at me, she stepped closer and put her hand on my shoulder. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "I have some wine chilling in the fridge." I answered, checking the stuffed peppers again. "These will be ready in 15 minutes tops." "It smells good," she said. "What's that on the pot?" "Orzo pasta," I replied. She had a sad look on her face as she nodded at my choice for dinner. It was a dish I had made for her on our last anniversary after we had discovered Greek food on a trip to Europe. Memories of those days of our honeymoon saddened me. But this evening had to happen, and this was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 on each side. She glimpsed him, then pulled a bottle of Zinfandel out of the fridge, opened it, and inhaled. "Can I ask?" she said before the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said and left her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, "Show time." I opened the door to our friend standing next to me. He looked a little anxious, nervous, but she gave me an understanding smile and then leaned over to kiss me right on the lips in front of him. "Hello, stud," she said, pulling away and walking past me. I could tell that Trev wasn't surprised by our public display of affection. "Hi, Trev," I said with a smile. "No. I didn't grin. Come on in." "Carson," he replied, stepping inside. Jan and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we walked in. For the first time in a long time, I noticed Trevor as he looked around the room. His gaze darted from Jenny to Deb and back to me. He looked like a man trying to figure out what was going on. "We're having a European dinner sitting down," I announced. "Jen is sitting with me, and Deb is sitting with Trevor." Trevor and my wife gave me a quick glance and turned away as Jen giggled. "I think I like this, a European-themed evening from eating to sitting." "What else do Europeans do?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, but Trev and Debbie didn't say anything back. Sitting next to each other, I could tell they were on edge because Jen just kept talking to them, being herself. Inside, I wanted to laugh. Europeans share a lot more than just seats at the table. I replied with a smirk to Jen, who smirked back and then laughed. "They trade spouses or have open marriages." "Interesting," Jen said. "What would you think of that, Trev?" He tensed. "I wouldn't like it," he replied. My wife flinched for a second and then looked away. "I don't know, Trevor," Jen replied. "Maybe the Europeans have something about it." Once again, my wife and Trev just looked at us and gave us a furtive glance. After serving the food, I offered everyone a glass of wine and didn't give the two sitting across from us a chance to refuse. I simply filled their glasses. They would need them soon. As we ate, Jen appreciated the choice of dish and how well it was prepared. Deb and Trevor politely agreed. You could tell they were being gracious, but they were both anxious. "How was your trip, Trevor?" I asked as we ate. Both he and my wife stopped eating at the same time. It would have been funny if it wasn't sad to see. The pain of the realization was hurting more and more with each passing minute. Only Jen's hand on my thigh calmed me down. It wasn't a sexual touch, but soothing and caring. "It's all the same," he said. "Meet the customers and our representatives in the region, then go to the next town and do it again." "You, Deb?" Jenny asked. "Same as Trev," she replied. "We both do much of the same work, but for different companies and clients." By this time, they were both picking at their food. Again, it was funny, if not sad. I tried to ignore it and filled their glasses again. When we finished, meaning, we stopped eating because both my wife and Trev had lost their appetites. Jen and I picked up our plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. "You and Trev just got back from your trip. Go sit in the living room, and we'll be there in a few minutes." "Okay," she said with a startled look and a fake smile. Despite the tension, Trev wanted to say something to his wife, but she left to go to the bathroom. I watched them walk into the living room, casting questioning glances at each other. They might have been whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were talking about, but I could imagine. They were worried when Jen returned. She and I joined them. "So you guys aren't interested in an open European marriage?" I said with a smirk. Jen joined me laughing. Debbie and Trev only giggled nervously as if it was a joke. "That's too bad," Jenny added, teasing me. "They're such prudes. How about we watch something I came across this week? I think you'll like it." "Is it a chick flick movie?" Jen asked with feigned enthusiasm. "It has both male and female aspects to it," I replied, turning the TV on the wall and going to the file I had saved on my hard drive. The first scene showed street scenes from a city with lots of sunlight and the coast. Then it turned around to show the naval base as the car drove north and stopped behind a cab stopped in front of a hotel. Trev hesitated a bit, but Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed first Trev and then her getting out of the cab and entering the hotel hand in hand. By this time, the shock was reflected on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and then walked to the elevator with their luggage and each other. They held hands again. And as the elevator door closed, they leaned in for a kiss. "Carson, can you stop?" Trevor said, but Jen stopped him coldly. "Shut up and watch," she said in a cold voice. "Both of you." When I turned to look at my wife, her face reflected panic and shame. I saw her lips quiver as she tried to look away from the screen. After that, the scene changed to the inside of a hotel room. And, yes, our stars gave a show. Deb and Trev were both naked and she was on her knees. When I turned to look at my crying wife, I couldn't help myself. "And here, I thought you were going to cheat with your big buddy," I said. "Fuck you, Carson?" Finally, Trev spoke up. But he didn't say anything when Jen slapped him and gave him a hard stare. "And finally," I said, narrating the show as if watching a nature show. "The cheater lies on the bed spread out waiting for the cheater to enter her with his average penis." The scene now consisted of Trav between my wife's legs. I then turned up the sound. "Yes, take me like this," said my dear wife. Trev just grunted. The video sped up to show them later when they got their second wind before he went to the bathroom. "That was good," Trav said there. "Does he give it to you that good?" "Sometimes," my wife replied as her mood changed. "I told you not to mention Carson when we do this." "Why wouldn't I?" "Bad conscience?" he said, coming back into the room. "I just don't want to talk about him." "You're killing the mood, Trevor," she replied. After that, they lay on the bed, and the video went on for almost an hour. Both of them took a nap. Deb was the first to wake up and lay there, turning away from Trevor. Then he woke up and reached for her. She didn't resist and let him roll her over onto her stomach as he placed a pillow under her hips. She handed him a tube of lube, which he took. Jen, who had seen the video before, looked at her husband with cold, hard eyes. He was angry, but resigned to seeing evidence of his betrayal to his wife. For her part, my wife stopped watching and sobbed quietly into her hands. The next scene was of Trevor going in and out of my wife several times. Shortly after that, they fell asleep. The video stopped for a second and moved to the next morning when they slept together again and then took a shower before separating. They were both in San Diego. At that moment, the screen went blank and I stopped it. Trevor stared at me angrily as Jen got up and came over to sit next to me. "Well," she said, "that was pretty enlightening, wasn't it?" Debbie finally looked at me. "How did you find out?" was all she asked. I turned the screen back on as I expected. She and Jen were talking in our kitchen last week. "Jen, is it true what they say about people on business trips having sex?" "Deb, I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trevor always comes over to your house, doesn't he?" "Jen? Yeah, but I wonder what he does when he's alone." "If he's alone, Jen, he comes home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's gone." "Jen, what do you mean, Deb?" "Deb, exactly what I said. What happens when people aren't home means nothing. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens when people are out of the house? Means nothing." For good measure, I replayed that last sentence 3 times for them. "That's what happened, Deb," I said, "that's what gave you away. It made me think you were cheating on me. I didn't know with whom, but then I knew it was you." "I already had my suspicions," Jen interjected. "The way you two always managed to cross paths on your trips, the way you sometimes avoided each other in conversation." She stopped and turned to me. It was funny how tonight they were feeling guilty and constantly checking each other out. "You were both pathetic. I've hired investigators in all 4 cities you traveled to," I said. She wrinkled her nose and shook her head. She sobbed again, knowing more was about to follow. The next video was Deb with another man in a bar and then walking toward a hotel room, grabbing us along the way. Inside the room, she did something similar with this man, kneeling and sucking, and then taking his cock with her ass. "You bitch!" Trevor shouted at her. "You cheated on me." Jen and I laughed as we saw his outburst and the desperation on my wife's face. They stared at each other and then back at us. "But wait," I pointed out wryly. "That's not all." The video continued. Trevor was in a room in Las Vegas with a slender and muscular Negro woman. Trevor must have developed an anal fixation because he had the woman there, and then later took her in the ass again. "My husband never does that to me," said the Negro woman. "Glad I could help." Trevor replied as he entered the bathroom and could hear the Negro woman wiping his cum off her ass with a napkin. Unable to contain myself, I clapped my hands together. Debbie just shook her head in disgust. "That's adorable," Jen said then. "Cheaters cheating each other, priceless footage." After that, we all fell silent. Everyone in their own thoughts. Deb was the first to speak. "Carson," she said, looking at me with trembling lips and voice, "where does that leave us?" It was then that I turned and looked at her seriously. "You know," I said to them both, "Jen and I have had a few days to come to an agreement and talk. We're both agreeable people. In fact, we're both not prudes. If either or both of you had brought up our exchange, we would have agreed. Honestly, I thought about asking you, Deb, but you chose a different path. Didn't you? You could have asked me openly and on so we could have made the decision and gone down that path together. Instead, you chose the selfish way of doing what you like and keeping me in the dark. You chose to lie and betray us. You betrayed us, Debbie. How do I forgive that? How do I get past you going behind my back and thinking you have the right to do whatever you want when you're traveling? Well, and not just when traveling. How long before you started doing it here? I bet they've already done it." Jen said, "I was told at his work that your dear wife has taken him out to lunch a few times." Debbie turned away. "Trevor did too. So what do you want?" Trevor finally asked. "Well," said Jen, It looks like we have everything we need for the two of you. Neither of us have children, so all we have to worry about is dividing up our assets. And since adultery can be used in court in Texas, you are both pretty much screwed. Literally, give me your cell phones. Both of you, I said. Open them. Deb flinched, but held it out unlocked. Trevor stammered, but Jen walked over and just snatched the cell phone from him. It's not locked, she said, holding it out to me. Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account. It took her a few minutes, during which time I checked Deb's phone. She hadn't put anything down either, but I glimpsed through her gallery to find pictures with Trev and the other man. There were pictures of the men's cocks and a couple videos. Cool, Deb, I told her, shaking my head when she looked away. So this is how it's going to go down. I'll never be able to trust again. Too many lies and too long. While I was talking, Jen called. Let's go, she said, and turned to look at what was happening. You both work for companies that have standards of morality. Have you forgotten that? I could see the near panic on their faces. Both your bosses and their legal departments would be very disappointed in your antics. One of them is a skirt chaser himself, but his company had to pay for one of his indiscretion, so now he let his HR and legal departments go after those who break the rules. That must be your boss, Trevor. Shit. He muttered. That's what got you in trouble, asshole. Jen told him. I've given you everything you've ever asked for in bed. I let you have my face like a $2 whore. You stabbed me in the back, Trevor. It's over between us. Well, not yet. What do you mean? Well, I picked up the story. Divorces are a given, and you'll both sign papers giving us 70% of the assets. If you fight us, the videotape of your speeches will go to your families and friends as well as your employers. Carson. Debbie looked at me pleadingly. Please don't. Why don't we try to work this out? Really, Deb? I grinned. If you saw the video of me fucking Jen behind your back, would you try to figure it out? Please give me a chance. I did, Deb. I snapped back. You and I got in trouble before you left on your fucking tour, and you decided to do it anyway. You decided to start taking the pills without talking to me. We're married. We decided to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed me and my trust before you even slept with him and anyone else. You lost respect for me, so it was easy for you. I just wanna know one thing. Why? She looked away, then looked at me again. Before you, I'd never had any experience with other men. One guy came over in less than a minute, Carson. That was my experience before you. I wanted to try others and see what it was like. I stared at her incredulously. You should have thought about that before you married me. I replied. It's when people try others, not after they get married. Marriage isn't just a commitment. It's a contract between two people. It means the two of them against the world, and that marriage is exclusive until both parties agree to it. You know, about leaving everyone else behind. She wanted to say something, but stopped, then spoke. Carson, I wanted to go out and have some fun before the wedding. But you showed up, and I didn't want to risk losing you. Things were so good between us for the first few years, but this last year, it all came back to me. I started wondering what other men would be like. Not love. I had you for that. Just sex, that's all I wanted. I shook my head disappointedly. All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you had to do was talk to me. Here at home, we could have found people we know and trust. Hell, I would have let you fuck that asshole if we had all decided to do it together since we were all friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and violated our trust. Debbie, along with trust and love, comes respect. You lost all respect for me to go behind my back. We could have worked this out together, but you chose to do it without me. Jen nodded along with me in agreement. That goes for you too, Trevor. She said. Especially after the way we talked, it was my turn to look at her in surprise as Trevor turned away, and Debbie looked at Jen and Trevor in shock. Did you do that? She asked. What did he say? The bastard told me he'd never share me with Carson and would leave me if I brought it up again or he caught me. Can you believe that? Debbie shook her head looking at Trevor and then pushed back and punched him. You stupid bastard, she said as he tried to cover himself from a second and third punch. When we started, I said we had to bring them in, didn't I? But you said no, that they'd never pull it off and leave us. I listened to you, and now where are we? You've turned into a cheater, Deb. It didn't take long, he said angrily. And after me, you started sleeping with other people. So don't act like a saint to me. I remember our first kiss at Christmas last year. You let me kiss you for a minute or two when Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It didn't take me long to get you into bed. In fact, less than a week. I thought back to that night, everything seemed so perfect. A holiday with our best friends. And while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. I fucking hate you, she said back to him. It's pretty damn mutual, wench, he replied. Jen and I watched them flaming at each other for a few minutes. We looked at them with contempt and disbelief. Was there any hope after that? It looked hopeless, too many lies and too much betrayal along the way. If we had children or were older, I might have been weak and thought about it, but I was young, and there were no children to tie us to each other. I wanted to leave. The doorbell rang again. This time Jen opened it. She returned with a woman carrying 2 bags and a smartphone. Deborah Madison Kane, she asked my wife, who nodded. You have been served. She handed her an envelope and took her picture. Trevor Gunderson? She asked Trev, who reluctantly nodded. You have been served. Debbie was now openly sobbing with papers in her hands. Jen turned to me and shrugged, then walked over to her husband. It's over between us. Go home, pack up your stuff, and get out. I never want to see you again. Do you understand? If you say anything to me, the video goes to your parents, your job, and anyone else you can call a friend. You got it? Deb didn't move, but then she turned to me and did something I didn't expect. She got down on her knees and crawled over to me and Jen. I'm begging you both, please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I screwed up. It's all my fault. Do whatever you want to do to me. Just don't throw me out on the street, Carson. Please, Jen, please talk to him. I'm begging you both. Debbie looked pleadingly into my eyes. I knew immediately that this was my test as a man. Yes. I loved her. No matter how betrayed I felt, I still loved her. But still, what she did was unforgivable. But I felt that throwing her out just like that would be wrong, but I'll never trust her again. Jen's moving in here and into my bedroom, I said, looking her in the eye. I saw her wince. I understand, she said, suppressing a sob. I deserved it. I need to talk to her about you. Okay. The door closed, Trevor left, and Jen returned. What are you going to do with her? She asked. You know she can't be trusted? Do you? I know. I answered. I'm not going to. Debbie looked at each of us in despair. Please was all she said. Shut up, Jen replied, and pushed her back down to the floor. Debbie lay like that for a second or two and then got back on her knees. Carson, please don't divorce me. Debbie, that ship has sailed, I said, looking down at her. We're getting a divorce, but there will be a legal separation for 3 months. You have exactly that long to convince me you're worth saving. In the meantime, I'll be living with Jen. She'll be in my bedroom. What used to be yours, do you understand? What do you want me to do, Carson? She asked me dutifully. Well, for one thing, you have to beg Jen to give you a chance. If she doesn't, you're finished. Debbie nodded and turned to stand up. Get on your knees, Deb, I said. Go to her on your knees. Beg her to give you a chance to redeem yourself for fucking her husband. Go. I watched her crawl on her knees to Jen, who stood there in her gorgeous slim long-legged figure, brown hair and high apple-sized breasts with thick nipples. I had enjoyed her so much the last 2 nights and planned to do it again. Jen, I'm so sorry. She said. Bullshit, Debbie. Jen replied. You're just sorry you got caught. I know it looks that way, Jen, but there's no buts. Jen snapped back. You betrayed my trust just like you betrayed your husband's. You two deserve each other. If it were up to me, I'd kick you out. But this isn't my house, and soon, it won't be your home. My advice would be to find a cheap motel for the night, for the weekend, and then look for an apartment to move into. You need some time to think about what you've done. Debbie turned to me as if I could save her, but I just stared at her, not backing away an inch. Get your stuff and go, Debbie. I told her, pack your stuff for at least a week, and we'll talk about how you'll get the rest when you need it. When she nodded and sobbed again, her face reflected dejection and sad agreement. She rose slowly and went to the bedroom to get her things. 40 minutes later, she had packed 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop bag, and a purse. Jen and I watched her load everything into her car, standing side by side as she stopped for the last time. She reached for me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and drove away in tears. It went better than we thought. Jen said, leaning toward me. They brought this on themselves. I added as we watched my soon-to-be ex-wife's car drive off into the distance. Every spouse has the opportunity to cheat. Not all of them do. It's funny, she said as she walked back with me. What's so funny? I asked Jen as she undressed. Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to tell their spouse. As she pulled off my pants and boxers, I felt her hand grabbed my boyfriend, who until last week had belonged to Debbie. Do you want an open relationship? She asked when I pulled away. It's too much like dating other people, I replied. Do you need that? I just need to change every once in a while, Carson. It's been a while since I've tried some variety. Then I might need another girl sometimes, I replied. Deal, she said, panting. Now take me. 3 months later, the divorce took place. Both Jen and I got the 70% I asked for. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the house she owned. In one day in court, all the financial and legal issues were resolved, but not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything but her job. Her parents eventually found out when she started setting them up in case I sent them videos and pictures out of spite. I never did. Trevor just disappeared after his divorce from Jen was final. She had enough money to buy him out, but the last thing he told her was that he would be in touch. It's been 2 years now, and we haven't heard from him. Debbie is still working and traveling. What she does doesn't bother me anymore. The other day, Jen and I were at a coffee shop, and she walked by busy on her phone. Jen and I live together, but we are both afraid of a serious commitment. It's been a year since my divorce, and my memories of my time with Debbie are fading. Jen and I talk about traveling around the world, or at least we've been talking. That damned virus from Wuhan, China ruined our plans to see faraway places, so we're both on vacation and doing nothing but running, walking and having sex like rabbits, but I'm still scared. So is she? Who wouldn't be scared after what we've been through? The other day, I got an email from Debbie. Hi, Carson. I hope you're well. I'm trying to live my new life, but honestly, it's not easy. I miss our time together. I miss you and us. I had so much time to think about what I did to you, to me and to us. I blew it. Think I deserved to have everything I wanted no matter what it was. In my pursuit of sexual experimentation, indulging my desires and self-fulfillment, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage, not to mention helping to destroy Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be so easy to blame him for what happened. But we all know that's not true. Everything I've done willingly. No one forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson, not only for ruining our marriage and our life together, but for, as you said, losing respect for you. But before I did that, I lost respect for myself. I succumbed to the belief that I deserved the pleasure and got over the fact that I missed out on everything. Now I have an experience under my belt that I never counted on. Divorce. Nothing about it. Nothing at all appealing or satisfying. He tore me apart. I hear you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness. But to say I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen. Your, unfortunately, ex-wife. Love, Debbie. P.S. 2 things. Being alone sucks. What happens outside means a lot.